Well, thank you for coming. This is the last Poet in Residence reading of the semester. We will, of course, I will have some really great things coming up in the spring, but for now, it's my pleasure to introduce, okay, this guy is really special. Here's why. He's not my friend. I mean, he just became my friend, but previously, the Poet in Residence series has been run by me saying, yo, hi, don't you owe me a favor? Are you coming through Dubuque? Want to read at my university? And I have amazing friends, and if you've been here, you've heard they're really great writers, and I just wanted you guys to be exposed to them. But this was the first time somebody asked me to read here. So he deserves a round of applause just for wanting to come share his stuff with you guys. Let's do that. And so I was really excited, and I, checked out the website and Googled and whatnot. It's like, this guy's legit. So I'm really excited to welcome Stephen Frech, who has earned degrees from Northwestern University, Washington University in St. Louis, and the University of Cincinnati. He's published 3 volumes of poetry, Toward Evening and the Day Far Spent from Kent State University Press, which won a 1995 Poetry Chapbook Contest, If Not for These Wrinkles of Darkness, which won the White Pine Press Poetry Prize. This is all very impressive. And The Dark Villages of Childhood, which won the 2008 Mississippi Valley Poetry Chapbook Prize. He has a 4th volume titled A Palace of Strangers is No City, which is a narrative of prose poetry / flash fiction, which came out in 2011. And he's also a translator, which I find fascinating. We'll ask him questions about that later. And he's translated from the Dutch a book called Black as Caviar. He's been the recipient of several awards, and in addition to being a poet, he's also a publisher, which means if you're interested in that sort of thing, tomorrow he will be speaking to the CGIM department at 10 a.m. About running a small press and a broadside press and whatnot. And so we have several of the broadsides back there for you to take a look at. So he's the founder and editor of Oneiros Press, publisher of limited edition letterpress poetry broadsides. And these broadsides have been collected by special collections libraries around the world, including the Library at Yale, the Newberry Library in Chicago, and the University of Amsterdam print collection. He comes to us driving through the fog of this morning from Milton University, where he was recently named Hardy Distinguished Professor of English. So yay for us that we are attracting some really awesome people to our campus and to this series. And please join me in welcoming Stephen Frech.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you all for coming. I'm really also delighted to see so many people. I'm totally willing to lie to myself and for you to lie to me that you're all here of your own volition. I did not plan to read this with any sense of irony, but I am going to start with a poem called Compulsory Education. It's not my poem. It's a translation from the Dutch. I translated a book called Zwart als Caviar, which translates as black as caviar. How many, show of hands for a moment, how many of you had, because there's college professors here, how many of you had high school teachers you felt just didn't understand the essence of you? Anybody? Yeah? Plenty of us? Yeah, and they made you do all of these compulsory lessons that seem to miss the essence of you. This poem is about that. And I, no doubt, had some of those teachers as well. Even if you haven't, I think just the experience of being a student, and I'd like to believe that we're all always students of one sort or another. Compulsory education. Not hatred. No, it couldn't be hatred. But nevertheless, they demanded the best years of our lives while we sighed ourselves stiff and indifferent through their lessons, not one understanding what he did there. But hatred? For that they were too defenseless and too stupid for the questions that kept us awake at night. No matter how vigorously they parroted their dead friends, they remained small. Not us. We combed with every week more lies from our hair, fantasized about ramming compasses through their lips, and scratched war cries in our notebooks. But hatred? No, it couldn't be hatred. So simple, so transparent was our resistance that even that disdain seemed taught to us. That's Menno Wigman. He's a rough character. He was evidently a rock and roller before he started writing and publishing poems. The first poem I'm going to read is actually the title poem of a recent chapbook called The Dark Villages of Childhood. The title itself is a translation from the German. This is not a translation I made. It's done by a translator named Simcoe from the early 20th century German poet Georg Trakl, his poem Nearness of Death. O der Abend, der in die finsteren Dorfer der Kinderheit geht, which translates, O the evening, the one gone into the dark villages of childhood. And this is that poem, The Dark Villages of Childhood. On the road leading out of the dark villages of childhood, a simple wooden wagon reports over every stone and rut. The loose joints creak. A split board screams. The rusty gate pin chatters in its place. Light spills like fine grain through the cracks. Catch up with the wagon. Tell the driver he's dropping light everywhere. He won't stop. He's factored loss into his haul. But he may let you look into the wagon bed at the grain passing as through the waste of an hourglass, but never running out. In the gloaming, dimmed imperceptibly by the little light your vision rests from the world, a fox steps onto the road. He is in disguise, posing as someone costumed as a fox. A brilliant and dangerous game, pretending to be what one is. I'm going to read a short sequence. It's in 3 parts. This poem started as a misreading of mine. I caught out of the corner of my eye one day the title in the newspaper, which read The Near Tender. And I did a double take because it's a wonderful phrase, and I couldn't understand what on earth that would be doing in a newspaper title. As it turned out, it wasn't the newspaper title. I don't remember what the title was. Again, I had misread it. It was a mistake. And I realized that I wrote that. It was a wonderful phrase. It was an accident, but I produced it somehow. And so the writing of this poem was largely an effort to try to understand what that was and what that phrase meant. In addition to that, there's a reference in here that follows throughout the poem of excuse me, an incident that happened at the symphony one night where the cello player collapsed. He passed out in the middle of a performance. And when I saw this, the orchestra kept playing and nobody seemed to respond. And I remember leaning forward in my seat and I didn't make a sound. And then suddenly the audience collectively made a gasp that seemed to come from me, but it was from the whole audience. He was fine. Evidently had the flu and had gotten dizzy and passed out. But it was a weird experience. So that factors in here as well. One last thing I'd say about this poem: in the 3rd section, there are 2 voices. They should be evident when I get there, but one is an anxious and worried voice, and the other one is a reassuring voice. Again, the title of the poem is The Near Tender. Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, conducted by Paavo Järvi. 1. Tonight, at the symphony, the cellist collapses to the stage. He and his instrument lie face down, like children through the summer, counting while their friends hide. The cello's hollow body hums from the fall, and the French horn, as if its brass pipings were the tangled burrow of small animals, still speaks of little griefs that bury us. The instrument cases wait, abandoned seashells and their hard mathematics of tenderness. The French horn's nautilus, open clamshells, the moth wings of mussel shells, a container built by the self, and so a model of how the self wishes to be held. So exactly you feel you're not really being held at all, the way being itself should feel. We drift unprotected. 2. Musicians warm from playing. Their lungs fit so neatly in the cavity of the chest as if they were poured in. Let the heart be a depth chamber in that sea, or a ladle in the chest's deep barrel. The near tender. The French horn has 3 valves. How many the human heart? Don't assume sleepwalkers want to return to their beds, wandered into strange houses, waking in rooms they've no idea how they entered. They might wish to stay. When the cops arrive and it's time to go, snow begins to fall and soften the edge of the world. Let's stand here and watch it come down, you'll ask, knowing what's coming and wanting to postpone it. The kitchen window has a view of pines and a hill. That snow, I remember, that stillness. How did I get there? Why did I leave? The cellist wakes to a speechless house. Even his cello's dumb and unresponsive. What then was this humming in the night? That music was perfect. Everything now, a lessening, a sorrow. 3. Small spaces open in the night, and we return to them with the desire like a train's arrival, growing out of distances. Wait. What, dear? The train is coming. Which one of us rides and which one stays? The train is for both of us. But we have only one bag. We have everything we need. We go together then? We go. Together is the best way. Small spaces made for us. I'm going to read a few poems from a different collection, if not for these Wrinkles of Darkness. It's a sequence of poems on the life and work of Rembrandt. He's not just a toothpaste variety. He's a 17th century Dutch painter, and the name, no doubt, is familiar to many of you. You may be thinking you don't know any of the work. You do know it. You may not have attributed the name with the work itself. He's a very famous Dutch painter. He's arguably the best religious painter we have in the West. And one of the things that I felt drawn to in the work was the tremendous humanity, the tremendous care for us his willingness to see us clearly for who we are, and to still love us, for all of our flaws, for all of our brokenness. And that seemed really marvelous to me, seemed, again, a mark of a very generous spirit. This poem addresses, I guess, that sensibility a bit indirectly. The title of the poem is Female Nude of a Woman I've Never Seen Naked. We've missed the point, perhaps, in making something beautiful. We admire those things most that meet their purpose. A stream of ants, the flower of eggplant, the fine cut of a spinnaker filled in a strong wind. But what should we make of our bodies? All this flesh and its various turnings, blemishes flaring, hairs cropping up. Pride blinds us to our own ugliness, that skin under the arm that begins to wrinkle, then wilt. We wear ourselves dry and thick where we were once soft, fingertips calloused from working the washboard, nipples tired from nursing the brood. Undress simply, as if you were alone. The garter and corset straps leave their impressions. Let your belly hang bottom-heavy as a pear, pleased to sag and be as unshapely as it wishes, every stretch of you tired, loose, fleshy, but easeful and relaxed, as in a warm bath and inviting me to stare. Now, imagine someone loving you for all that. I don't know if it's some larger need, a feeling of needing to be forgiven, but that seems a very generous attitude for all of us. I have the great pleasure and honor of having my daughter and my son-in-law here tonight. And for them and for me and for everyone else, I'm going to read a love poem, again in the voice of Rembrandt. One of the other things I love about Rembrandt is, you live in the 17th century in Europe, and you're subject to high infant mortality rate, plague outbreaks, these kinds of things. And for Rembrandt, who experienced all of these, his first wife, whom by all indications Rembrandt adored, died. His first 3 children died in infancy. His 4th child, Titus, survived, but it was as a result of birth complications that his wife, Saskia, died. Titus lives into adulthood. He marries. He has a daughter, so Rembrandt has a granddaughter. Rembrandt's son died during his lifetime from the plague. He was left with the care of his daughter-in-law and his granddaughter. His daughter-in-law died from the plague. And in all of this, he remains so optimistic and so open and ready for love. It's something I really admire about him. This poem, the title of which is Sketches Toward the Flight into Egypt, Rembrandt in the 1640s made a lot of landscape paintings, and he made very, very few in any other decade, really in his entire career outside of that very brief window. And the speculation by so many of the biographers and critics is that those were the years that his wife, his first wife Saskia, was dying, and he couldn't bear to watch her perish. And so he was going out every day in the Dutch landscape and doing what was very unusual for him, which was sketches and landscape paintings. And so in my version, I called this, as I said, Sketches Toward the Flight into Egypt. You have Rembrandt, the artist, who's watching his family taken from him, imagining another family of sorts, a biblical family who is, as no doubt many of you know, the flight into Egypt was trying to stay together, was trying to save itself. And we all know how that story ends. Anyway, this poem is in 7 sections. The 7th section is the only one with a title, which I will give you when I get there. And I think that's it. Sketches Toward the Flight into Egypt. 1. The midday sun buckled the bridge boards with a heat like breath from the bellows. After a rainless month, it burned the grass it had stirred. The wildflowers' pollen crackled in the heat. The flames claimed an acre of wheat. The rest of the harvest, ground into flour, baked into bread, had a smoky taste. Goats, knowing full well that grass returns, step slowly into the spent field, raise, then plant 1 foot at a time, each hoof stirring a cloud of ash that dusts their ankles. 2. They woke at night and walked for hours when it was cool. Joseph rose and lit a lamp that without the moon lumined only a small section of the road, barely visible side to side. When Mary stirred, the landscape she'd seen was gone, the hills far off, the tall reeds that marked the creek. The world she'd wakened to seemed smaller than the one that had lulled her to sleep, and she debated till dawn whether this was a comfort or a fright. 3. Beyond the light you do not know. You do not know the road ahead, where the road turns or when, if the road unrolls like fabric from the bolt in front, and if so, if the road rolls up again behind. Joseph leads the beast, Mary riding, nodding off to sleep to the clop, clop, clop of the donkey's feet, dreams of brick after brick set in its place, and a wall rising up, or a legion of soldiers marching on the stone roads. 4. Cattle gather roadside, lowing. Sheep have flooded the road like white sea foam. The travelers wade through the bleeding. A crow flies overhead. There are 3. There are 3. The sheep too low can't see and leap one over another. The cows pull up grass with their teeth. A calf hurries beside his mother, nudges the teat trying to feed. The donkey nods through. Burden, sweet burden. 5. Mary hums a little, Joseph broods, while his fingers worry a stone smooth deep in his pocket. The new night reddens at the setting. The child emerges like citrus from the rind, plump, bright-eyed, clean, even without washing, learning from Mary the need of holding on to things. A lesson to be learned for this world. A lesson to be unlearned at its departing. 6. The child dozes and wakes. So new, how can he know which is the world and which the dream? Which is the fold of fabric? The hills fall into valleys, the deep furrows of bark. On the road he lived like kittens in a sack, deep in his mother's clothing, swaddled in a wrap. He knew already the mother's scent, salt and coriander, mild cheese, an alfalfa field after rain, a world of thin, sweet milk, the warm breast, and the delicious sweat that runs between them. And 7, returned, I lay down with Saskia and the paintings. If I had all the paint and skill, I'd sketch the whole road leading home, mark it as with piles of stones. With the landscape painted, we could walk for miles and not worry of losing our way or wonder how far we've traveled, how much farther we have to go. This is the tree where I held you first. This is the bush where we ate. This is the crossroad we'll never take. This the route we'll have to return by. Here we stopped once and crawled into the wheat field, matted down the grass like deer at night, tried to keep quiet though the breath had to come, and the stalks that still stood and touched us, their grain quivered at the tip. This one marks where you will tire. Send me on ahead, and I will continue strangely happy somehow, knowing where you are and how to get there. I'm going to read a poem toward the end of the book. Again, the book basically follows the arc of a life, and we know a lot about the life. We know very little about the voice of Rembrandt. He was very typical for his age, in his time, in that they left very few notes, very few teaching notes. He was a teacher. He ran an art studio. There are no personal letters that survive of Rembrandt's. There are 7, I think there are 7 business letters. They're very short and they're very businesslike. In the midst of all of his loss and all of his own generosity, toward the end of the book, as he's getting older, I wanted to give Rembrandt a friend. And so I wrote a poem called The Bricklayer's Sled, where Rembrandt and his friend, I gave him a very Dutch name, Willem. The actor Willem Dafoe bears that name as well. It's a very Dutch name. Rembrandt and his bricklaying friend Willem decide to skip work and ride the bricklayer's sled out to the iced-over harbor. There's a word in here called glühwein. It's a warm wine. It's a German word, I believe. It's a warm, spiced wine, something that will get you drunk, which you will see happening in the poem. The Bricklayer's Sled. Snow eases the horse's burden of bricks. On low sled runners, Willem slicks with a lump of salvaged candle drippings. So the old horse on winter roads hauls the load as he once did. After days of deep freeze, Willem and I unload the yard of brick and ride the sled to the harbor. Skating honeys the day for toddlers and their nurses, for the school children, boys who frisk like spring ponies and practice tricks in front of the girls holding hands. Willem and I race back and forth across the ice, hauling a line of boys until they gain too much speed, crash, and slide in a pile. Tavern owners push their carts to the dock to sell warmed cider and glühwein. Willem and I down a few tankards quick, and I notice for the first time the knuckle he's opened to the bone that morning. He laughs and clenches his hand into a fist to show me. By afternoon, I'm drunk, and we're racing faster. My arms strain to reach around his broad shoulders and my belly between us. All the skaters we pass so quickly look like stuffed dolls in their winter wear. And for the day on the ice, we laugh like young men, still newly married to our first wives. No, like boys who have fooled our masters and stolen away from work. The steady clop of the horses' hooves and their echoes through the ice, the call of nurses, the hoots of boys, all drown our laughing and calls to the horse for more speed. In my arms, I can feel Willem's body shake and the warmth coming off him as if he were sobbing. Only when he throws back his head on my shoulder can I hear his laugh, so close it dampens my ear. That's a kind of love poem as well. Love of friendship. Are you all doing all right? Everyone's okay? Yeah? All right. Laura and I were discussing the peculiar nature of writers coming to University of Dubuque and reading things they hadn't planned on reading, so I will not stop that tradition. I will read a poem called Prayer for the Maker. Does anybody know what the word poet means? Anybody other than Lauren? No? And its original Greek, it means maker. All artists, even performance artists, where there's no physical object, are makers of sorts. And I think there's something about a spiritual sensibility as well that sees in the made world a model for the art of making. There's another strange moment. I had a friend who chipped his tooth when we were in graduate school, and I think he was a little embarrassed when he saw this poem. I didn't actually do this. What's described in the poem, but it seemed a gesture of friendship to him, even though it never happened. It's called Prayer for the Maker. Given leaves, could we reconstruct the tree? Given a nest, could we cite the bird that wove it, the fabric that used the thread she stole? It's too late to ask the worm she ate, though he probably knows. How can we know the potter from the bowl he threw, the miller from the sack of ground wheat, the fisherman from the nets he stitched, the hooks he bent, the barbs cut? Could we study the young and know their parents? If it's true, the object never exceeds the maker, then how do we keep from descending? What hope is there for children, for the object made, for the maker who suffers the sight of it? Without the fine details, our lives suffer. We seek them out, yet they bring to mind the slackness of skin at morning and the trembling at dusk. And so, with fine details, we suffer. Lord, today, I put my finger in a friend's mouth to feel the edge of a tooth just chipped, and wondered how the tongue moves unscathed in there. I'm going to read one more poem. With the students this afternoon, we looked at a poem that appears earlier in the book to another that I invented. The letter I invented, the gentleman who received it, I did not invent. Another Dutch painter was a student of Rembrandt's, Carl Fabritius. Was arguably Rembrandt's most accomplished student. He went on to do wonderful work, and he is believed to have served for a time as one of Vermeer's instructors. So there's a kind of instructive artistic lineage there. Again, we read a much shorter poem earlier in the book. This is a poem that appears also late in the book, late in Rembrandt's life. And in here, Rembrandt is writing a letter to a former student. I offer this up to all of us, but especially those in the room who are still formal students. The master, the teacher, writing a letter to a former student admiring his work. He's seen a painting of Carl Fabritius's and basically says, I could not have taught you any of that. You did that on your own. Letter to Carl Fabritius, October 1654. Butcher, baker, silversmith, cobbler, miller, carpenter, painter. We all walked to our masters as boys, frightened and slack-shouldered, never to wield the other's ball-peen, maul-stick, or plane. But you came to me, a carpenter, a Fabritius, carrying in your muscled torso knowledge of the roof's pitch and the eave's protection. Most of what I knew I could teach you because it was learned. But you, my dear Carl, will have to continue selling. Your knowledge slept deep in those arms I've seen sink a nail in 2 strokes. Yours is a gift you cannot pass on or give away. I saw your goldfinch, and in the bird's throat wavered the beginning notes of a song I have sung only under my wings and thought nobody heard. Your goldfinch looked about to call it to the crowded room, recite it word for word. My song, only harped on a better instrument, played by more skillful hands. Even after the goldfinch resigns to the perch and the hinged feed box, when he wakes, he must forget sometimes, and seeing no bars, think he's free. The shadow he casts on the wall outmeasures the chain that holds him there. His song fills the kitchen, rises above the sound of cloves being ground in the mortar, higher than the hook that waits for the Achilles tendon of the lamb's leg. Like waves against a breaker, the tethered dash themselves to the chain's limit. I want to hold the goldfinch's chain in my hand, to feel the urgent tug his wings could muster. I stared away an hour with the painting, and the bird's onyx eye outlasted me. I'm burdened with blinking, with eyes that dry and blur. You and I and the bird, we were whole once. Maybe we were there together. Thank you. Do we have time for questions, or?
We have time for questions.
Good, good. Well, I need to be mic'd for this, should I?
It won't record.
It won't record otherwise, all right. Questions?
Tell me about some of the research you did for the Rembrandt.
The research I did for the Rembrandt, I researched all kinds of things. I read anything and everything I could get my hands on that talked about not just the Netherlands, but Northern Europe, what foods they ate. I use the word, for instance, zucchini in one of the, I love zucchini bread. So that wound up in one of the poems. He's admiring his wife is what's happening, and she's baking zucchini bread, so it's this sort of lusty poem that has zucchini bread in it. And someone told me, that's not a Dutch word. So Yeah, so I was researching the kinds of things that they would eat. I researched a lot of maritime history, boating, shipping, merchandise. We live in an era almost of constant threats of economic financial bubbles, right? The first financial bubble actually happened in the Netherlands. It was tulip bulbs. Yeah, just extraordinarily inflated prices for tulip bulbs. And interestingly enough, it created what we now know as a futures market. Because you were investing something that was a bulb in the ground. And so it, by definition, wasn't really there yet. It was yet to become. And so it created a kind of futures market. Stock market started in the Netherlands. So this whole, what we know very, it's become much more complicated, of course, but what's very familiar to us now is the stock market. It basically started in the Netherlands with the Dutch East India Company. I did research on the chemistry of paint. I mean, it seems really obvious. I mean, what's there to know? But I mean, I'm not a painter, and so I needed to know those kinds of things. I learned all kinds of interesting stuff. Again, this seems obvious. They had to use natural pigments in the 17th century, and so some of what we recognize as the luminous nature of Vermeer, for instance, right? The painter of light, I think he's often characterized as. Some of that is Vermeer being brilliant, of course. But one of the things that makes it very difficult for 20th, 21st century painters to replicate that is the pigments we now use are synthetic. And so the particles are smaller. They're more uniform in size and shape. That shape is often more spherical. And so it doesn't refract light the way the old pigments used to because they were irregular. They had different facets on them. It would reflect light in different ways, just simply behave differently. I did a lot of that kind of research. Yeah, and then I think I read every biography that I knew of about Rembrandt. And they all bear out, I think, the personality that's available in the paintings. And that was ultimately what I trusted, was my own visceral response, the response of the guts. I think we should trust our guts. Our guts are pretty smart, and they try to tell us really important things. We sometimes distrust them and develop physical ailments as a result of it, right? Like ulcers and these kinds of things. That's our viscera trying to tell us really important things. So I in many ways, too, followed a lot of my own instinct and response to the paintings. It was a wonderful project because you have this known figure, you have a known rough outline of a life, but there was no voice there. It was all visual. The person was available, but the voice was not. And so the other thing that was nice, that while I was writing this as a much younger man, I was able to say things, I think. I was able to say things in Rembrandt's voice that I don't know that I would have said on my own. Making work can be scary sometimes, and that helped a bit. Yeah, I felt like I wasn't doing it alone either. Yeah, that was nice. That was a long answer to your question, but sorry. I'll answer another one, and I promise not to be as long. Yes?
Why Rembrandt?
Why Rembrandt? I grew up in a family that was interested in art. I grew up outside Chicago. We had a family membership as long as I could remember. My folks still have a membership at the Art Institute of Chicago. Going downtown was a big deal. Going downtown to the Art Institute was a big deal. Even if you're not into art, if you're standing in front of it, those colossal, larger-than-life lions tell you that what's inside is a big deal. And so there was that kind of gravity to, I think, art in general. I also grew up in a house with a sibling, my brother, who has a astonishing and ferocious talent. He's quite simply amazing. And as a visual artist, he's a sculptor now. And I watched that If I'm honest with myself, I envied it, I think, a little bit. Maybe not the particular talent of art, but the facility that he had. It seemed so available to him. He was so good at it from the very beginning. Why Rembrandt specifically? I think some of what I described with the female nude and the love poem to his first wife, Saskia, was largely it. I think I was feeling those things, though I didn't have language for it yet. I'd published before this book a slim chapbook of poems. It was only 14 poems. That was the one that came out with Kent State. And it was a sequence that was largely poems in response to Rembrandt's religious art. And when it won the contest, Maggie Anderson called me and she said, "We love it. We're going to publish it." She said, I said, "I don't have any suggestions about the poem." She said, "I just have a question about the subtitles. Some of them say after Rembrandt and some don't." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Let's just take it out." And so Rembrandt sort of disappeared from that earlier, much smaller book in name, but I think the spirit was still there. And I left those poems for a while, and then a few years later I wrote a poem that wound up in the Rembrandt book called Cornelia II. It was the first poem I wrote about his life specifically. It was about his second daughter who died, and it seemed tragic to me. He'd named the first daughter Cornelia, died in infancy. The second daughter was born, and he also named her Cornelia and gave her a number. And that seemed awful to me. And when I wrote that poem, or at least an earlier version of it, I wound up asking myself the same question you just asked me. What is it about this that keeps drawing me in? I think the book was largely an effort to explore that, what that was. And I think ultimately, as I said earlier, it's that beautifully generous spirit of Rembrandt for all of us. You know, though he may be doing biblical paintings, though he may be doing portraiture of affluent Amsterdam merchants, it's about all of us and his generosity toward our humanity. You know. Broadsides. I have some on the table back there. I hope you will take a look. There are also books back there. You're welcome to look at those, buy some if you like. But at the very least, on your way out, take a look at the broadsides. I started printing letterpress poetry broadsides in 1999. I had been buying them as a graduate student simply because they were beautiful and I couldn't afford them. And I had this crazy idea that if I started printing them, I would stop buying them. And I could save money. That never happened. I still buy others' poetry broadsides, but I also print them myself now. And letterpress, anybody know what letterpress printing is? No? You all have heard of Gutenberg? Yeah? Gutenberg, the great invention, he has two inventions. One is more commonly referred to as inventing the printing press, which is not exactly true. He modified an olive press. I've lived without a TV for a long time. I do a lot of reading. He modified the olive press, the screw technology of the olive press to print. The printing press had been used in Asia for hundreds, 1,000 years, but he modified a agricultural press for printing purposes. So that was a modification more than an invention. The invention they made was movable type. And movable type changes the world. It presages and makes possible all of the great popular revolutions in the West, all of them, religious, social, economic, every single one of them. Because what movable type does is it decentralizes knowledge. It brings it out to everybody. Prior to movable type, you had a select few, and by select I mean limited, but also select as in the anointed ones, right? Slaving away, copying books by hand is what we call manuscripts, right? The illuminated manuscripts. It could take a monk a year to copy the Bible. You have movable type, you could put out thousands of them. Thousands. And to what end? Well, for more people to read, number one, and more people to make decisions for themselves about what they want. It's enormously important invention, movable type. Letterpress printing with movable lead type went out of commercial use early, mid-20th century. It's labor-intensive, it's slow, it requires enormously heavy equipment, and we are now all, as you know, in a digital age, so we don't need letterpress printing. But it's also a really beautiful craft, and so I print letterpress poetry broadsides, and the broadsides that I print really try to capitalize on the visual capability of what we more commonly call posters. So they're colorful and graphic and try to capture some of the spirit of the poems that are featured on them. So at the very least, please take a gander as you go out. Good? Bravo. Thanks so much for coming. Yeah.